Welcome to the California Master Beekeeper Program webinar with Professor Emeritus of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology, University of Delaware, and affiliate professor of the Department of Horticulture at Oregon State University, Mr. Dewey Caron. It's an honor to have you in the camp Zoom room this evening. We are very excited to learn from you about your experiences, your research, your your life with overly defensive bees and Africanized bees, Scutellata hybrids. We're looking to you for some guidance this evening around a few things. Uh, where they're at, how to recognize them, and how to deal with the temperament, perhaps, when to move away, what to do with overly defensive bees. So, knowing that you have, my goodness, you've had professional appointments at Cornell in 68 and 70, at the University of Maryland in 70 right through to 81. And again at the University of Delaware, 81 to 2009, serving as the entomology chair at the last two that I mentioned. And your sabbatical year that was spent at the USDA Tucson lab, 77 and 78, and a Fulbright year grants in Panama and Bolivia with those Africanized bees. That's what we're here to learn about. Um, Now, following your retirement from the University of Delaware, I don't. It's an anomaly to have Dewey Caron and retirement, those two words in the same room. I'm not quite sure you're ever going to retire, Dewey, but I'm grateful for the service that you continue to provide, the guidance, the education that you continue to provide, and as a camp board advisor, it's just such a gift. Your generosity of time and service to beekeepers across the nation, across the world. We welcome you this evening, and we're strapping in for a time of great learning and appreciation. So please welcome Dewey Caron. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Wendy, and good evening for a Monday night. Good to join you all. Kind of a dual discussion this evening. I'll start with my screen. By the way, I applaud all of you in this program. As a member of the board, seeing some great things that are coming from the program and from individuals, of course, the individuals that make up the program. Off to a very strong start, and I applaud the direction that everything is going with the program. I'm going to try to do a couple things tonight. Defensive bees initially, because that's of concern to all of us right now, and then, of course, for some of us, Africanized bees, and really maybe try to answer this other question of whether they should be of concern. Because yes, we are thinking about our bees, and I think they are often thinking about us as well. I started with Africanized bees in the 1980s. In 82, captured a swarm in the Panama City, and just was fascinated with them and with their biology. And so through the years have put together some information of how beekeepers have coped with them. This is now getting a little bit dated, but I talked about Africanized bees in the Americas and how beekeepers throughout the Americas have been dealing with them. We'll focus a little bit more about what's going on in your state this evening, as well as the bees themselves. So let's pull back the curtain and get underway. As you see, I've retired, so please excuse any senior movements you might get from me this evening. Give you a couple warm-ups. What do honeybees do with their honey? What do honeybees do with their honey? They sell it, of course. And what does an allergic bee get? You see where this is going, right? They get hives. Okay. Another one, let's do another one. There were two drunks that were sprawled out in the gutter, and one looks up and says, "Hey, look, here comes man's best friend." And the other says, "Aye," and it's coming with a dog. So start off our Monday here. All right, I'll start a commercial break. We now have a new 8th edition of Tools for Varroa Management. Um, we've gone through every page, expanded our committee to look at it, went through thoroughly everything, ratcheted down a little bit the recommendations, really emphasized the importance of sampling, and then made sure all the pages of information at the end of the details and when you can use these various materials, both chemical and non-chemical, are appropriate. So the new 8th edition is now available, and it is freely downloadable. Honeybee Health Coalition Tools for Varroa Management. I hope you use it as one of your tools. So I thought tonight I'd do first a little bit about defensive bees, as explained, then talk a little bit about Africanized bees basic, then need we be concerned, and then at the end sort of handling, coming back to defensive bees. So let's saddle up, cover our steeds with our Napoleonic blanket and our vest with our bee shield, and we're on to fly off to defensive bees. What the bees might be saying: look, I'm a beekeeper. Ouch, darn it, ouch, where's my hive tool? Ouch, that smoker is out again. Ouch, ouch. So we always wonder what our bees are thinking and what our bees are saying about us. So maybe that's some of it. Um, bees, I don't like to use the term that the bees are aggressive. That what we're talking about in biology here is a defense. So I hope I will not use the term aggressive and be consistent talking about their biology of defense. For that, we know that a period of time for many bees is passed through a life stage that is called guarding. But those bees that are not guards within a colony have other bees that will respond and are fully capable of stinging, have developed the materials in the glands and the chemicals that go with it. And these we'll call soldier bees, or soldiers of the hive. And they're bees that will respond to disturbance. Now, bee defense we can identify as a 4-stage response: alerting, activating, attracting, and then a last stage. And the last stage may be stinging, that we're familiar with, or fleeing. And it depends on a number of factors which of all of these might occur. So in a colony, we walk up to it, or something was there in the apiary, whatever. So there's initially an alerting. For example, we open a colony, we bump the colony, a dump truck drives by on a road right next to us, or something just moves in front of an entrance of a colony. Then the release of not the guards usually stay where they are, but the soldier bees, and bees then activate or fly towards that movement, towards that smell, become much more prepared to take off, to do something when the bumping and the noise and the movement of the substrate, et cetera, is occurring. To us. And so when we open it as beekeepers, it's usually flying at us, flying at our face, because that's where there are a lot of features that they can immediately discern, or flying at the wrist, where we still have our wristwatch on, and the distinction between skin and a watch band, for example, a Fitbit watch band or something. They then fly in terms of attracting towards something, that movement, that smell, that different appearance of something. And in most cases, then for us, that will mean intimidation. They come and they bounce off us, bounce off our veil often initially. And then finally, that last stage, as I indicated, can be either fleeing or stinging. And that is the decision that individuals will make. But once they start the stinging behavior, as we know with alarm odors, that the sting is a response to help attract help from sisters, so that then alerts others. They've already been alerted, they've already been activated, or prepared to activate, and then others then respond, and they're responding then to the alarm, whether when it continues. Okay. Um, when we talk about bees being defensive, my colony is just, it just wants to sting me all the time, or geez, I think I've got very defensive bees since I changed my queen, or that package is very defensive this year. Defensive bees are not doing anything that other bees don't do. And as we know, in an apiary, some colonies are more productive than others. So too, some colonies are more defensive than others. And we don't often understand that those four stages of defense, which by the way happen so quickly, it's hard to discern what going from one to the next to the next. It's just that's the way we can describe it. But generally, we'll talk about a defensive colony as being those that just are more quick and respond and persist in their response. More soldiers respond, will respond to greater distance, and then that persistence. And so we can have often, same apiary, same, all, we think the same conditions, but some colonies may be more defensive than others. And of course, now time of year. And we're at that time of year when colonies may be more defensive. Why? Why are bees, or why will a colony be defensive? The two biggies are us, the beekeeper. We disturb the norm. We open a cover, we bounce things around, we walk in front of entrances, we move a wheelbarrow with our boxes in, we drive in a apiary with a vehicle, all and any of all of those things. So we're a major reason why all of that may occur. And the second is that colonies, as they get bigger, then have the luxury of having a larger soldier cast, a soldier group, more guards often at the entrance, but also more soldiers. And so it's just the chance of you're initially getting a sting and then alerting others, or more on opening, there are more bees that there are then are mindful of the conditions of all of a sudden there's a big change. So the two larger reasons for a colony that may not have been defensive but is now defensive are those two. We know weather conditions is a third, particularly weather conditions that change, weather conditions that are not conducive to the bees themselves, too hot, less for foraging, too cold, and so that they can alert much more rapidly. Hungry bees are another, when there are poor resources that are available. The bees that might be soldiers are then tied up in doing nectar processing or the foraging to get those resources to bring in a colony. And so there's just a smaller soldier factor. The factor of stored honey, it's an open question. Some would have us say that, well, when they get more resources, they're more defensive. The data is mixed. The studies are mixed as to whether, in fact, that's the case, because often more resources means a larger population as well. It's kind of hard to tease the two apart. There may be a factor. Of course, defensiveness, just responding to the stimulus of a sting. We're certain type of clothing where we may wear, we're just not aware that a sting is sticking in our clothing and then wafting off that alarm odor. But certainly the biology is that stimulus of a sting is a very powerful factor in terms of defensive colonies. Queenless colonies, things start going when you start losing the same amount of queen substance and brood pheromone, the two key chemicals that balance the activities of the bees and the colonies. When those start getting offset, then we get other behaviors such as defensiveness. Smells and movement in front of the colony, or vibrations to the substrate, to the colony itself. Just taking that cover off can be enough. Prying at the corner to get the cover off, prying at the corner to lift the box off. Bees are very well aware of their surroundings and may then be alerted from all of that activity of the beekeeper. Disturbances of us, the beekeeper, but others as well. As I mentioned, traffic on a nearby road, just moving heavy equipment into the apiary, our vehicle, perhaps a wheelbarrow, predators. So some of these that are known and unknown. Changing things, changing up locations, change in smell, change temperatures, weather, as I mentioned, changes at which the bees, I mean, they're excellent weather people. They know what's going on, and so some of those are all factors. And certainly, and not least, but one other we can list is the genetics, is the bees themselves. And we do know that there are some that are more defensive under ordinary or typical conditions than there are others. Where our Africanized bees are from, for example, Scutellata is a very defensive bee, but it lives alongside to the west of in Africa, a very gentle group of bees that inhabit the African tropics, the Adansonii bees, and the bees that occupy the higher elevations of that same location, the Monticola bees that are in Mount Kenya, Mount Kilimanjaro, etc. So genetics can be very much a factor. This illustration is of a program in Panama. Like many other countries, Panama, when they were invaded with the Africanized bees, uh, tried to set up a program to do some selection so that they could offer their beekeepers a selected, more docile bee, less defensive bee. And here they're some of the Ministry of Agriculture people are lifting a box off, and you can see that at this point they were not very far along. And most of the countries never got very far in terms of trying to change the genetics of this animal. I'll delve into that just a little bit towards the end. Uh, Talking about defensive bees, I talked a little bit more. If you want a little more information, handling defensive bees in Bee Culture magazine of about a year, a little bit more than a year ago, of April 2021. A little bit more information on defensive bees. Um, it's a continuing of what we might say. Oh, these are very gentle bees, or these are very docile bees. But those bees that were so nice when I started them in the spring are now very, very defensive. What's going on? So some of the things I talk about in terms of trying to say what defense is of a colony. For example, if you have bees right away, before you even do anything, or you're simply taking a cover off versus not. So bees in your face, bees that are get that very quick response. Bees stinging away from their hive, whether we know if they've been disturbed, we're disturbing them or not, so that when you are done, you cannot immediately take off your veil. You've got to get away a ways before you try to do that. Maybe right into a vehicle or into a structure of some sort. Or in the case of your bees out on the edge of the field, and you're on the other side of the field with a tractor, and you got bees flying in your face and bothering you. So stinging away from immediately where the hive is. Responses that we would say are excessive, that develop rapidly. So defense is something that we'll see not only at the hive but away from the hive, but also how quickly it might occur. One of our ways of looking at defense is we hit a colony once with a metal ball, and then wave a flag in front. And the difference will be that in about 30 seconds of waving this flag in front, defensive bees will sting that flag a number of times, whereas the more docile or more gentle colonies will not, or there'll only be a couple stings in a little, 1x1 or 1x2 piece of cloth. And then continued response, not just initially that response, but they just keep coming. They just keep coming out as we do something with them, or of course, as whatever is disturbing them starts getting stings, whether it's the hide of an animal or in our equipment or something. And we all know, or after a few years of keeping bees, that a colony may be difficult to handle at some point in time. But what we might call as defensive is that it's a continuous action. It continues again and again, not a one-off, not a one-time event, that the bees are always responding in that particular way. The illustration here is from Panama, and standing here, taking this photo, I started getting stings. And all that had happened, as you can see, is 2 beekeepers had walked up in front of the colonies. So that's a characteristic of what might happen. They were attracted because I had in front of my face a camera, and cameras and camera equipment will get a great deal of stings embedded in them if anyone's had any experience with Africanized bees. And I'm sure some of you may have. So that's a little bit about what I want to say about defensive. Before I seg perhaps into Africanized bees, I wonder, we don't have a great number on tonight, but maybe if you wanted to have a question or two at this point, we could handle that before we go on. I don't know if there's anything that's come in the chat yet, Wendy.
Nothing in the chat.
Okay.
I have
Yeah.
a quick question. Maybe it's
Okay.
quick.
Sir Peter.
Thank you very much, Dewey, for this. I've been looking forward to your talk. I see in Northern California, I just see bees that seem to be extremely defensive. I don't think there's any African nature to them. Oftentimes, I will just either requeen or sometimes just remove the queen into a better environment and requeen the defensive hive. And for whatever reason, they seem to just calm right down, both of them. But I haven't got a lot of data to prove that, but it seems odd to me that some of this is genetics, and I know you said there's a lot of reasons for defensiveness. So is there a way to kind of tell the difference between what's a genetically defensive hive and a other than actually sending bees out to get the genetics run on them, or is there?
Other that the crux of your answer is other than sending them out, no, there isn't. So defensive is what we define it, and there are a number of beekeepers that have the same type of experience that you do, that gee, perhaps compared with the past, there seem to be more colonies that become defensive like this. And we're saying the same thing about queens. Queens just aren't lasting as long as in the past. And for both of those, we really don't know. We can't pin something down. As to sending them off to get them tested is a real issue. Because queens mate with a multiple of drones. She can mate with only a couple or 3 drones that have Africanized bee genetic material. The defensiveness, we say, comes from the drone, from the father. And if she does that mating, a colony that otherwise does everything else you want it to do, sometimes just is more defensive. And it may be defensive for a period of time while that sperm from that drone is being used before other subfamilies take over in terms of their importance within a colony. But 2, some of it is just our condition. So a long way of saying, yes, I agree, we've seen that, but there's no way really to how to try to pin it down as to what it might be specifically.
Yeah, and Jim popped in the chat that his black GoPro collects a lot of stings.
Aha. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. They love cameras. Don't like their picture taken, I guess.
Is there a connection between regularly inspecting the hive and its defensiveness? Is it like a good thing to inspect once a week, every 2 weeks, or longer periods? Do you have any data on that?
Simon, there's not any good data with that. Some would hold that the more that you inspect a county, the more that they are less inclined to build up this population that all of a sudden then reacts, those soldiers. However, their short-term memory is such that once a week doesn't seem that it would be something that that collectively the county is going to remember. Oh, yeah, that's the beekeeper, so we're going to go easy on them because we have this relationship with them. So no, there's not much data one way or the other, but some certainly do insist the more you look at them, the better the bees are to you. That we have that old adage of if you really want honey production, leave your colonies alone. Don't disturb them. Just play with your nukes during that time of year and let them go about doing their thing. And the same might be true with defensive. If you don't want them to be defensive, work with the smaller colonies, work with nukes, rather than trying to work with full-size colonies.
Okay, thanks.
Geez, I hope I'm going to have easier questions than those two as we go on here. All right, why don't we go on? We can get some others. So let me figure out where I was. I said I would first do defensive bees. So now let me go on now. I found my way around the beehive here. So we'll talk about some basics of Africanized bees. First, for myself, I first encountered them, as I indicated, in 1982. Delaware, the University of Delaware in Panama had a convenio, and I was going back and forth as a department chairman and serving partly as a department chairman in Panama as well at the same time. And I've had a chance to see them in a number of different places since. As Wendy indicated, I took a couple sabbatics where I would go and actually work with them for, I had a couple Fulbrights for a year's period of time. I was in Tucson, but that was prior to their coming to Tucson. We had just our regular bees in Tucson. I still keep them so that I go to Bolivia in early December. My wife's family is from Bolivia, and so we've been going every year. And so I'll go for 4 months, and a family member keeps the bees that I took over from a grandfather 30 years ago, and is making a living with just keeping the bees. So I have a chance to experience them every year. I've also taught at a university down there in San Simon, and they have a beekeeping program. So these are bees from the university. The reason these are too close together here is that one was getting too big, so we took a divide from that large one to try to keep them there. One, keep them there present, and also to work on more different stock. And you can see the apiary, the colonies are well separated, and then it's fenced so that we don't get dogs or inadvertently people trying to wander into the apiary. And we have to use ant guards. Ants cause our Africanized bees to abscond a lot, and so we try to keep our ants down. So it's a different world, but I do have a chance to continue with them. So I have the great opportunity to keep my sting titer up. I work with my bees up here and get plenty of stings, and others of my mentees, and then I go down there and work with our bees, and I get plenty more of my sting titer. So you can't keep stings away. So delving right into what are they? I'll start a little bit with what you all know, and that is there are variations in populations of honeybees. This is at one time we thought that there was enough differences that we put subspecies names on them. So these are different. These are all Apis mellifera bees. In other words, the bees that we have. But then the names that are shown here, mellifera, ligustica, Scutellata circled there, those are at one time were subspecies names, but they were really geographical isolates. So there was a bee of the peninsula of Portugal and Spain, a bee of the Italian peninsula, the bee of the Carniolan Mountains, the bee of the Caucasian Mountains, for example, a Middle Eastern bee of some of the islands in the Mediterranean, and several bee groupings of Africa. And based on how close they might be, there's been a grouping of these. So there's a group which are African, and as many as a dozen different geographic races have been identified. A Western Europe group, or M group, a C Middle Eastern group, Eastern Europe, and O the Middle Eastern group, and finally a couple of others. We brought bees from A, M, C, and O to the Americas at various times. So the bee that we're talking about is the bee that is identified by that Scutellata, or the prominent bee of the savannas, the lower mountains, barely into tropical areas of Eastern Africa. And it's got a number that it bounces up against in Western Africa of the tropics of the Congo, for example, is the Adansonii. On the mountains are Monticola. And at the very Cape end of South Africa, Cape Hensis. So these are naturally occurring different populations. We believe that with the speciation that the Apis group developed in Asia, moved westward through Asia into Africa. And the bees that we have that came to us in the 1600s from Europeans were from these Northern European groups. Initially, we recognized the German or the mellifera, and then in the 1850s, the Italian bee, a little bit later, 1870s, the Carniolan bee, for example, that came to us that were then imported into the U.S. And we believe these came from some ancestor that was in Africa, as well as these various African groups as well. And we could tell them a little bit different on some genetic factors, some aspects of behavior, geographic in terms of their isolation, and morphometric. So initially this was done by different measurements of body parts, antennal segment lengths, parts of the wing, the cells of the wing, et cetera, a lot of morphometrics. But really, a good way of thinking of that is because of geographic features and human cultural features, there were groupings of different bees. We got the bees from Northern Europe because that's how settlement of the Americas occurred. The African bees had bees for a longer period of time, and again with interactions with bees and people had and different geographic formations and conditions, climate conditions, had several different groups. So what we call in the U.S. or the Americas Africanized is this Scutellata, this particular group, and it ranges all but the very tip of South Africa on up into to what is the Sudan, Ethiopia, that part of the world. And as I said, has some others that are very closely related to it. And beekeeping is a very ancient practice in Africa with Scutellata and the others. It was much more of a initially our human ancestors, the primates, robbing nests, and then much of the culture was humans robbing nests. And so the depiction here is of a warrior from Africa, a native culture from Africa, and a point of ready to harvest. The harvest here being of a hive that is a log hollowed out, or bark that's been rolled into a cylinder, making a fire, and then doing harvest at night, driving the bees away, and then harvesting. Using all of the various products, the bee brood, the stored bee bread, the wax itself, trying to drive most of the bees away, and then of course the honey that is both ripened and unripened. And so there was a season in terms of their management. So that's the origin of our bees. I'm sorry, the arrow is showing that, by the way, the bees that we got in the beginning of the 1600s came through two two different invasions of northern Europe, both through the Iberian Peninsula, but also through the Arabian Peninsula, thinking that our Iberian and mellifera bees and Italian bees different from our Caucasian and our Carniolan, from two different stocks coming out of Africa at different times over time. So what is it? Well, the Africanized honeybee, as we call it, is a human-mediated hybrid that occurs on the American continents. It was created from the intercross between an African subspecies, this mellifera scutellata, Apis mellifera scutellata, and various European and Middle Eastern honeybee subspecies. Various, not just cross with Italian, what we know as Italian bees. And that hybridization continues as well as today. We've called it different names, and some of the literature gets a little confusing. At one point, there was an effort to call it a Brazilian bee. It's not. An assassin bee from some of the popular literature, a neotropical bee. Many people initially in Brazil knew it as an externata or foreign bee. And of course, then Time magazine put on the unfortunate name of the killer bee when they were seeing stories from Brazil of people getting stung, and then a school bus ran off the road, and the driver and some school kids were killed, and it was because of bees, and so the bees were blamed, and that was then picked up by news outlets, and finally Time, and the name then killer bee came into existence. How did they get there to and become this name? It was by a geneticist. The Brazilian beekeepers wanted to improve their stock that they had. As the 5th largest land country in the world, Brazil was mired in the middle of countries in terms of their honey production. So they thought that they had great potential to be a much better world honey producer. So they enlisted a geneticist, Dr. Dewey Caron, to go look at bees. He did in both Asia and Africa and in Europe. He made several selections, but none of the selections made it back to Brazil. And so to salvage his trip at the end, he put some queens basically in his luggage, to 2 queen breeders in South Africa, and some 5 queens that he had from a recent visit. He'd been up north of the country of South Africa that was then Tanzania now. And that was the inoculum, that initial number of bees, because what he tried to send back, a large selection, did not make it. Now, if this sounds like a crazy scheme, recall that the reason the beekeepers were putting up the money for this trip was to try to improve the bee stock of Brazil. If that sounds crazy in our things in our sense today, remember that we did the same, particularly in the 1860s, when the bee that we had, largely the mellifera from Northern Europe, we attempted to change that. And we were hearing stories of these Italian bees, Northern Italy Italian bees. And so we did an importation in the middle of the 1800s of Italian bees. And among others, L.L. Langstroth was one of the individuals that successfully brought in some Italian queens, and then started within a couple of years selling Italian queens, along with his hive and along with his book, The Hive and the Honeybee. Then others thought that were hearing of other stories, and so other bees came in from a couple of the islands, from northern Africa, from the Carniolan Mountains, of course, the Carniolan bee, and then the Caucasian bees. And we actually, the second person that was responsible for bee stuff in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a guy by the name of Frank Benton, the Frank Benton introducing cage, the 3-hole Benton queen cage fame, was actually sent to Europe by U.S. Department of Agriculture to look for and particularly import stock. Of course, we know that the stock that we'd had, largely the mellifera, was largely replaced by Ligustica, the Italian bee, although we did get pockets of Carniolan bees and Caucasian bees, for example. And as we look at our genetic material in the US, there is still a mixture. So if this sounds like a crazy, way out idea, we've done it, and we've done it earlier before. Beekeepers would say quite successfully with Italian bees, not so with the Scutellata. Well, then a biological accident occurred. So we're talking about a subspecies, perhaps, which is not well defined, but a biotype that maintains its own identity. The bees were introduced into an apiary near Sao Paulo in Brazil, and initially were then used to develop breeding stock. And the idea was then to develop a bee that was more docile, because this Scutellata was quite defensive. And although a good number of the queens actually came from 2 queen breeders, they were then much more defensive than what was regularly known by the beekeepers at the time in South America. An accident occurred, material was released when the scooters were removed from colonies. And then, rather than continuing the program to select, they released virgin queens, because they started doing well initially. They seemed to be a big difference right away. And the bees then did something unexpected, as they started to spread this population, this biotype, and hence the name of Africanization. Initially, they thought that what was happening was there was hybridization, so that for every virgin queen from the stock brought in by Dr. Kerr, that would then be distributed as a virgin queen to beekeepers. And so the bees would mate with drones in the beekeeper's apiary. And so you would be having hybridization. And well known in biological factors is hybrids often have a different what we call hybrid vigor, or something better than either of the 2 parents. So the hybrid of the 2 different lines can be an improvement. And initially this was thought to be the case. Well, then the bee started to, as I say, maintain its own identity and to spread. It was in neighboring Paraguay within 10 years, in Bolivia in 10 years from its initial introduction to Sao Paulo. Continued to spread south into Uruguay and Argentina. Spread into the mountains, the Andes Mountains, and started climbing to higher elevations. They thought that it would not pass the Amazon because of the denseness of the jungle there. It moved very rapidly, all keeping its own identity. Now, how do we know this in terms of its spread? We know this basically on a field demonstration of defensiveness. What was happening was animals were dying. Animals were all of a sudden being stung. Animals that were in cages, animals that were tethered, tied, couldn't get away. They were getting stung. And then beekeepers or someone that would approach that colony, they too would get stung. So it was really on that behavior that we started noting that this population was keeping this defensiveness and moving. And then, of course, humans as well. The U.S. Department of Agriculture set up what was attempted as a barrier in Venezuela, pumped a great deal of money into the country of Venezuela to start a huge number of beekeepers. And as the bees reached Venezuela in 1977, it has the distinction of having the highest number of deaths from beekeeping stings, individual beekeepers being stung to death. They're novice beekeepers, and they started with gentle bees, and within 2 years, and we've documented this for many years, a population of bees would be then invaded. You would then start getting the periods of defensiveness, and within 2 years, you no longer had what you thought were docile colonies. You had nothing but defensive colonies. And so all the countries, we pumped a lot of virgin queens into Venezuela. We did in Panama, we did in Costa Rica. Huge number of mated queens, of European stock, and set them into colonies. And right alongside Africanized bees, the European colonies went downhill, and the Africanized bee colonies then prospered. And anything that you set up with European bees within 2 years was converted over. in all of these various countries. They reached Mexico in '96, and our first record of them in Texas was 1990. Now we were doing some trapping at this point in Mexico and in Texas as well, because we wanted to try to document their spread. There were a couple of ideas to stop, make a biological barrier in Panama in '82. One of the thoughts was to make a 5-mile swath of jungle that we would use Agent Orange and kill all the vegetation off, so the bees would not cross a 10-mile barrier of nothing for them to feed on. Thank goodness that one was never started. But at the Telucetepec in Mexico, we attempted a very long 3-year program, lots millions of dollars of money to try to have a biological barrier of beekeepers keeping bees there, as we had in Venezuela, and we repeated it. We got a lot of people and animals stung and killed in that part of Mexico. So by the time they were at this point, I worked initially with trying to determine how do we do some tests. Marla Spivak, who many of you heard at the University of Minnesota these days, she did a test in her thesis in Costa Rica to try to demonstrate defensiveness. And Nicaragua, we set up some students likewise in Honduras, so that we were eventually getting better ways to tell these bees apart, not just, were they stinging animals to death or people to death. And so by the time we got Mexico in 1990, we had we would take samples of them, and then initially we did again measurements, morphometric measurements. You would take 10 bees, and we eventually developed a computer program, and a computer would look at some wing variations, sizes and lengths and angles of wing veins. That's all, just the forewing, and you could tell the difference on 10 bees of probability that this was Africanized or was more European colony of bees. Texas did a great deal of sampling initially. The X's show where they have been, and they have been, you name it, they've been there. They've been reported there, including also in Canada. They jumped ships and got to the various islands of the Caribbean, et cetera. One place in the Americas they have not been is Chile. They were taken over the mountains in Peru and Ecuador, so they're there, but not in Chile. There's a big desert in the northern part of Chile that they'd have to cross in very high Andes. And there is a barrier in Argentina that I will talk about as well. Initially, we looked at their spread in the United States. The U.S. Department of Agriculture took over this mapping. So all the various colors are the various years that they arrived in various counties. These are measures of counties. So you can see the dark red for the lower part of Texas, lighter reds, and then greens over here in California. And for 1994, Arizona and California for initial records. We believe there were 2 populations in Mexico. They split for the Central Cordillera. Some came up the Atlantic Caribbean side, some came up the Pacific side. And so they split in terms of their isolation. The population in Florida is from separate. It did not spread along the Gulf Coast as initially predicted, but then was transported probably to the port of Tampa initially, and spread from there. I'll come back and talk about California. So this mapping was stopped in the mid 2000s. It's no longer in effect. There's some literature that is important for you in California that you might look at in terms of its spread initially. The first is from San Diego people, Dr. Kim, 1998-99, in all places, Western Journal of Medicine. Paper in 2006 I'll refer to, and then these last 15, 17, and 2020. So this is being recorded, so you can have a chance to look up each of these, and I'll do them again here in a minute. So the most definitive look after initial spread in California after arrival in 1994 was a survey in 2006. And a survey in 2006 saw that they were up above Orange County into Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, basically. but sampling above that, the green dots showing that they had not spread north of that particular area. And that particular where the chevron is here is of importance because I mentioned Argentina, and this is at a latitude of which there seems to have been a barrier, not a barrier, but a transition zone that is set up in the country of Argentina. So, in looking at 2006, it looked like, well, yes, they may be along coastal areas, Mediterranean climate areas of California, but perhaps not much further. And then a more in detail look for those in San Diego, you can see primarily this was University of San Diego folks. So you see they did extensive sampling across San Diego County, and you can see all the reds indicate that defensive counties, the circles of some of this was a genetic study, and then the green not. So there was a mixture, at least in the most southern county, in terms of bees. Reason they didn't go into Imperial County is because there's so much commercial beekeeping there versus San Diego County to do that particular study. In a study then in 2015, to that particular study, again, mostly San Diego State people, they looked again at that pattern in San Diego County. They found that it was a similar distribution to Texas. After colonization, there is some hybridization because there are beekeepers that live in tree hollows and sides of buildings, and some beekeepers, of course, in the area. But they are mainly keeping their African genetic material. Now, this is not a complete analysis of the whole gene complex. We're looking at markers to try to be able to say these things. So in 2015, another extensive study looked at 265 bees at 91 sites, and they found Africanized honeybees as far north as Sacramento, but only 155 miles further north of an earlier study, that study that showed them in San Luis Obispo. Okay. In San Diego County, 60% of the bees they found were Africanized. Now, most of the sampling was done from flowers. And the folks that are doing the sampling are saying, if we go out to flowers, we have a greater chance of sampling for feral bees, bees that are living in hollows of some sort that are not maintained by beekeepers. That's the distinction. Some of us as beekeepers might want to try to contest some of that assumption, perhaps, but by collecting at wild flowers in your community, let's say, or any of your communities or somewhere in your county, would you have a greater probability that those bees would in fact be from feral colonies, or from your bees or some other beekeeper in your county? We've got a lot of bees in California. When they sampled from managed colonies, and these were hobbyists, these were not commercials, they didn't go over the Imperial Valley, they found 13% of the bees that they sampled were Africanized bees. And again, this is by genetic markering, not by the morphometrics measures. Although the African honeybees are smaller size, and that's why the morphometrics also do work in terms of your study. But look at the size of the study that we're looking at, 265 bees. So this is that study. To then update that, that was a 2015 study. So in 2017, Lynn again, out of San Diego State, looked at distribution with people from Davis at this time, looked at the distribution throughout the state. They did a much larger sampling, 2,000, almost 2,000, one shy of 2,700 bees. They found all of the counties in red that they had in their analysis of these genetic markers, they had Africanized honeybees. The pink were counties that they did not find Africanized honeybees in, but had very few samples and surmised that those counties did have Africanized honeybees. Okay, so on up into Yolo, even into Lassen County. And so showing a distribution. But from earlier studies, as from here, from San Luis Obispo, not a great distribution, increase in distribution above the 42nd parallel. Looking at this question of the hybrid zone, unfortunately, a very small number of bees. This is a study done in 2020, selection hybridation, again in +1, PLOS 1, looking at a transect of bees initially here in Argentina. So again, as I indicated, a hybrid zone's being set up so that there's a prohibition on moving bees north and south in both Uruguay and in Argentina. So if you are a beekeeper in northern Argentina, you can't move them south. And if you move them north from southern Argentina, you can't move them back. And it is, at least in Argentina, pretty well enforced in terms of movement of bees. It's at least equivalent to how Alabama keeps bees from other states coming out or going into Alabama. So it was, I mean, there's always ways around these prohibitions, but it's, the beekeepers are on board that they're not violating as such. So that they looked in terms of, again, the propensity of these markers, and blue would indicate that it is mostly European markers that they're finding. Red would indicate that it is mostly Africanized bee markers that they're finding. So this is a transect going from southern Argentina on to very northern Argentina. So blue, mostly blue, with some other mixture of materials in southern part of Argentina, but in the northern part, mostly Africanized honeybees. They compared that then with looking from San Diego County northward in California. So again, from looking at the bees that were in San Diego County, red indicating mostly coming up with Africanized bee genetic material. The middle is what they call mixture. In other words, Africanized and European. And then this would be the C groups. In other words, bees that have origin of either being we would call Italian or Carniolan bees, for example. So, and in San Diego County, being a mixture of as much as near half and half, as you then go north to the Bay Area, being mostly Africanized, mostly Europeanized the bees. So an indicator that perhaps there is also this hybridization or this line of demarcation to which a bee that's adapted for tropical, semi-tropical conditions, Brazil, for example, Amazon, for example, Paraguay, Bolivia, Venezuela, Central America, is not as well adapted and doesn't compete as well as European bees do. And if you can help maintain such a barrier, then perhaps there could be this issue that mostly only beekeepers in the very southern part of California might have to put up with the bees that are very defensive a lot, that have this more material of genetic material, and those in the northern part a lot less. Of course, we don't have that in California set up, but it was a powerful indication that maybe such a thing should occur. And that would apply for Arizona and New Mexico as well, and perhaps at the Texas-Oklahoma barrier. And this is equivalent to the 34th parallel versus the 38th, which is Sacramento. Okay. Now, there have been other programs. So using the computers at NASA, we looked at in terms of where were they spread in the United States, and using a huge number of environmental conditions we threw into the computer, we came up with this prediction of a suitability index. So the orange is an area suitable for Africanized bees, the blue not suitable. And you can see that basically a predictor is that they would spread up the West Coast, right on through most of the queen rearing area of California, and to a little bit lesser degree, but spread up the East Coast. They're in all of these areas today, occur in all of these areas, with one major exception, and that major exception is the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia maintains there are no Africanized bees in the state. They don't have traps out to confirm that, but they know that there just are none. So there are no Africanized bees in Georgia. And you can see it's the first tier of states and then into the second tier of states as well. Again, Alabama and Mississippi say they've gotten rid of most of theirs, perhaps. But this is a question, if you go looking, you may find them. There's another prediction more recently from people in Colorado State, looking at other factors as well, and they say that they will be able to exist in Canada as well, so in the distribution. All right, the last slide I wanted to talk about was this one that just has come out. The admixture of Africanized honeybees from Panama to San Diego, California. So they looked at 4 sites. They picked 15 bees that were in a transect from Panama City to the Atlantic side of Panama. They looked at 15 bees in Guanacaste in Costa Rica. They looked at 15 bees that were from Chiapas in Mexico, the very southern province next to Guatemala, and 15 bees that were from San Diego. That's it. 15 bees. And then what they did is look a little bit larger, both at their mitochondrial DNA and the nuclear DNA, and be able to classify them whether they were primarily African. So all the bees from Panama, from that transect, with just a hair, a little bit of difference from Middle Eastern. This would be called carniolan bees. The bees that were from both Mexico and Costa Rica. I'm sorry. So that here's the 15 bees. So that they select. So their baseline was, this was how they would identify Africanized. Western, this would be mellifera. Middle Eastern is Caucasian and carniolan. And then Middle Eastern would be other Syrian bees and North African bees, another mixture, the O line of bees. Okay, that was what I talked about a little bit earlier. So here are the 15 bees. These are the 15 bees that they looked at in San Diego. So the red is Africanized bees, and the orange here, or the yellow, I'm sorry, colorblind, is what we call the Eastern European. So this is Italian carniolan bees, with some of the Western bee, the mellifera bee stock as well, and some of the mixture, the O line. The bees of Mexico, the bees of Costa Rica, just Guanacaste, and then the bees from across Panama. 15 bees. And from that, a couple of conclusions. And one of the conclusions is that the bees that they picked up in San Diego, in the county, have a mixture of different genetic materials. It certainly is not all African, but not all managed bee material Italian. But they're saying there is a good mixture of genetic diversity, of what is Africanized bees in the state of California now. Whereas in Mexico, and certainly in Panama, there's relatively little admixture of genetic material to be able to do breeding in those areas of a different type of bee. Okay. By the way, most of this from Mexico, they did select, I think, 4 bees from the highlands, and most of this up here is the highlands bees from Mexico, not the Chiapas bees. So they found both nuclear and mitochondrial ancestry, 60 bees from the 4 countries. The genomes were sampled from, as I say, Panama, Costa Rica, Mexico, are predominantly African genomes, 76 to as much as 89 in Panama, and possess mitochondrial ancestry from the African lineage, with few individuals having European mitochondria. So in tropical, subtropical conditions where the bee exists, it is the bee that does the best, despite all the efforts to bring in other stock, despite all the efforts to try to bring in other material. In contrast, Africanized honeybees from San Diego show markedly lower African ancestry, only 38%, with substantial genomic contributions from all 4 major honeybee lineages. So 38%. And again, these 15 bees were collected from feral colonies. In other words, they collected them from flowers. Okay. So they're not saying they were beekeeper bees, they were feral bees. The good part of all of this says that the population in San Diego County emerges as a reservoir of diverse admixture and high genetic diversity, making it a potentially rich source of genetic material for African or honeybee breeding. So even where out our door, we will often encounter more defensive bees, there still is some hope that the bees are different, and there is still a wide mixture of genetic material. And certainly from the look in terms of the issue of this, not having a mixture of bees. So most of what we hear, Argentina, the #2 honey producer country in the world, is doing that with European bees. And they're maintaining it with European bees, not Africanized honeybees, by a system of helping to develop that there isn't a transfer of bees back and forth. So basically, it's not too late, but it's certainly high time that we got into being very serious about this possibility of a further spread of genetic material just within California, and the lesson as applies to some other countries as well. I mean, we don't need a roadmap. Here's a roadmap of some things that we already know about where some of this might go in terms of what we might do. So for most of you on our program tonight, or are going to catch this later on, the feral bees in your area may or may not be Africanized. We tell by summer and fall because of the conditions of chance of more disturbance and colonies being larger. We know that Africanized honeybees swarm much more frequently, multiplying as fast as possible, simply as a survival instinct. It helps them keep ahead of mites. It's one of several good possibilities they have of keeping ahead of mites. Africanized honeybees are gleaners. They don't wait to be stimulated. They do dance language. It's just they don't wait to stay at home to be woken up, to be have the shaking dance, wake them up, and have bees do dancing and follow them to figure out where to go. They go out. They go out by themselves. They're not great honey storers. If the forage conditions are poor, they tend to want to leave, to abscond, leave the area, to look for better forage. That's an adaptive behavior where they have existed in Africa. It is an adaptive behavior in parts of where they currently exist. When it occurs in our bees of absconding in October, it's obviously not very adapted. There's no place to go within normal limits of how far swarms will fly. And so, but it's still part of the biology of our bees as well. They maintain their identity by multiple ways. It's a fascinating talk just for me to discuss how they keep their own identity. It's a fascination, and it is done multiple ways with mating, with biology, with behavior, when they have drones, etc. Commercial bees that are requeen regularly may have a defensive trait, but the issue is our divide between what is commercial beekeeping and backyard or hobbyist beekeeping in the United States. is along lines of what we want for stock and what we consider to be defensive. Defensiveness is not generally an issue for larger scale beekeepers. In fact, in many cases where their bees are a long way away from where they are and they can't keep an eye on them, defensiveness is a trait that they actually have some affinity to. Need to avoid feral bees or checked after hive, and that's how populations got established in the Caribbean islands. That's how populations of Africanized bees got established in the Tampa Bay area, and now in South Florida as well. So our propensity of getting that free swarm that has inadvertently come off a ship that happened to be Africanized honeybees is an inoculum for a population. Happened over and over. So need we be concerned? Has changed beekeeping and beekeepers as well. We need to keep colonies small. We need to help protect ourselves and animals and other humans from defensiveness that we must prepare for in advance. Maybe the colony will not be defensive today, but we don't know. And we need to manage them a little bit like commercials do, that you build up the population to accomplish something. So beekeepers after almonds break down their colonies to build up nukes. They break down their colonies to go into blueberries, and then out of blueberries they break them down to go down up into apples. So they're building colonies to accomplish something. Pollination of almonds, nuke building, for example. Well, we need to do the same with Africanized honeybees, because if they get big, they just simply leave, or they begin their swarming behavior, or both swarming and absconding as things bother them. So it's a different management scheme. Just as we know with Russian bees, we are going to manage them a little bit differently. If we're going to keep our Russian stock, we've got a requeen. That's just a way of life if we're going to go that route. Well, so too with Africanized bees, we just will adapt a different type of management so that we and they can get along with us. What can be their problems? Let me identify number one: finding queens. Impossible at Africanized bees. They're very light sensitive. The queen runs immediately on you opening the colonies. You just don't find the queen in Africanized bee colonies. Finding the queen. Number two, the swarming, absconding, and then going into a structure where they're closer to humans. And then initially swarms, absconds are just as gentle as can be. And then they become those monsters once they then inadvertently get disturbed. Three is we would throw away this colony. This colony has that few bees. There's nothing. There's no honey. There's that little patch of brood. There's nothing there. We'd throw that away. This colony will explode. This colony of Africanized bees will explode. Will become a productive colony in 1 month. They are fantastic brood builders. Give them a little bit of resources and they turn around immediately. So recognizing how we're going to do our management, you can see we're prepared for the management. Although behind me, the manager there doesn't have gloves. You'll notice he doesn't have gloves on. This is a small colony, and they're quite docile at that particular stage. Non-problem number one is this critter. You'll all recognize the varroa mite. We don't control varroa mite. We don't need to with Africanized honeybees for a variety of reasons, depends where you are. Some populations do need control for varroa if they have a lot of European genetic material mixed in. But areas where there's less genetic material mixed in, it's not a control issue. For a variety of reasons. They go through their brood life cycle faster, 19 days to rear an adult, not 21 worker. The mites don't have enough time. There's a great propensity for uncapping, recapping of cells by Africanized bee populations, and they raise their drones only a certain time of year. The reason we have such a huge issue with our varroa populations is we allow our colonies to raise so damn many drones and raise so many mites at the same time. And so colonies start multiplying, mites start multiplying rapidly in our colonies because our colonies are raising so damn many drones. If we control drone populations better, we would have a lot less of our issue with our European bees with mites. What hasn't happened, thank goodness, is the killer bees, the hype of all the killer bees. The killer bees are coming. Close your doors, move to Alaska, and all of the other advice that was given. Yes, we've had human deaths. We've had some tragic occurrences of people in remote areas, of people with incapabilities of escaping. Animals have been tied up that could not escape, etc. Inadvertent disturbance of colonies. We have a propensity to use lawn trimmers here, which bees just hate. There's probably not enemy number one of any colony. Want to make a colony defensive? Go out and hit it with a lawn trimmer tonight, and then go inspect it tomorrow. Keep doing that, and you'll continue to show. You'll show defensive bees continually. Instances that, but they have not lived up to the hype that they're going to completely change our landscape, and they haven't because of a number of factors. Very good, I think, educational programs, and the fact that we do have some efforts to try to limit their spread into our populations. So, do we need to be concerned? I'm concerned when they're this thick on my veil. When I work with my nephew, I have to shout. This many bees flapping their wings, stinging this this tape along the top of the bee veil here, along the where the wire is confined, produces a lot of venom. I have to wear glasses because they squirt their venom as well, and it'll get into your eyes, and it's very, very, very irritating. It just, do we need to be concerned? If we've got Africanized bees, yes, we do. But we're beekeepers, and we're going to try to solve the problem one way or the other. When sometimes that weak colony that doesn't perform, or that colony that remains defensive, there is no simple answer. The simple answer that we might have is get rid of it, euthanize it, move it to a more remote location, is sometimes the last of the options that we try. We're beekeepers. We're going to try to solve this problem, and we continually try to do so. So finally, circling back, handling defensive colonies, don't unless absolutely needed. At the end of that big nectar flow, you got monster colonies. Break them down. Why do we need those big colonies? It's much more fun to manipulate small colonies. Avoid movement, vibration. We have to go to individual hive stands, but even our colonies, if you've got 4 colonies on a hive stand, by the time you get to the 4th, they know you're coming, and they're more prepared. Those 4 stages of being defensive. Use the proper personal protective equipment. Be prepared for the excess reaction. So if I'm not wearing gloves, they're in my pocket at least, and I may stop to put them on. Manipulate only when necessary during appropriate weather conditions. That's fine unless you've got 5,000 colonies and you got to get through these 2 yards of 200 yard colonies each today. Manipulate the end of the day, not dark, but towards the end of the day, gives a chance that for those soldiers to get settled back down and that disturbance to be reduced. Others say do it first thing in the morning. It's much pleasanter first thing in the morning, temperature wise. Be fast but gentle. Avoid excessive time-consuming manipulations. Boy, don't we sometimes have a colony open a half hour, and then we wonder why it wants to sting us. Manipulate weaker, smaller colonies if inexperienced versus those full-size colonies. And after they've done their thing, they've stored that honey, break them back down into smaller size colonies. We don't need full-size colonies to get through our winter, through most all of California, some of the very high elevations areas. Keep colonies small, split, requeen units with selected queen cells. And that's one of the reasons we're very fortunate that we've not had as many problems with defensive bees, is that we have a large cadre of very, very good people that know how to raise queens, excellent queens, millions of queens, and we use those to requeen. Harvest frequently with Africanized bees, that helps a lot. And then the last is sometimes what ought to be the first. If the defensiveness continues, euthanize it. We can get bees relatively cheaply. We shouldn't, if we're in a neighborhood, have to put up ourselves with defensiveness, and certainly our neighbors shouldn't have to put up with it as well. We don't do enough of it. So I talked a little bit longer than I thought I would. I'm sorry, but I would be glad to try to answer any questions or comments you might have.
Thank you. That was excellent. And I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else did too. There is a question from Denise regarding the hybrid part of AHBs.
Thank you, Dr. Caron. I've heard you talk several times and I always learn something new. So thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you. Thank you.
I keep getting, whenever I look into the Africanized honeybee, you always get a different story. And I thought I had it down to where, yes, it was a hybrid between the Scutellata and Italian, and the bees were already mated and they swarmed out with that colony. But you're saying that is actually the hybrids between the Scutellatas and the various European and Middle Eastern honeybee species. So that's already a diversification of genetics right there
Yes.
itself. So who exactly or what exactly is providing that overly defensive genetic material? Is it the drones of the Scutellatas that have like the defensive chromosome that they're passing that on, or where exactly does that defensive trait come from?
So there's no one gene that controls all those 4 stages of being defensive. There's a whole bunch of genes, but it is definitely in the mating. So the drone is contributing towards that defensiveness, that particular series of genetic components that will make up whether a colony is defensive or not. Yes, from drones. It is a mixture, and there is, depending where you go, you can find anything from very gentle Africanized honeybees to very defensive Africanized honeybees in San Diego County, as well as, if you travel south. And in part, it's been how much European material has been mixed into it. But the tendency of Scutellata, of shown in both the mitochondrial and in the nuclear DNA, particularly the mitochondrial DNA, is that behavior. The African bees tend to have the set of genes that make the bee more competitive in tropical, subtropical climate conditions. San Diego, we would be subtropical, northern subtropical conditions. And then add in the mixture of the drones, and then you can get the very, very defensive component of more genetic material that is Africanized than Europeanized. And in part, it's because the Africanized bee colonies are not accepting European drones. Africanized bee colonies tend to rear their drones like Apis cerana tend to rear it in the beginning of the brood cycle, raise a smaller number, and then they keep them for a longer period of time, and then don't accept the drifting drones to the degree that our European colonies will do. So, yes, you can take a trip to Costa Rica, and all you need to bring is your veil. And yet I can take you to Costa Rica and show you where we go in fully protected. And I've done that. I've done it with groups of beekeepers. So what is the Africanized honeybees? It is as great a mixture as what we might call Italian bees here in terms of this quality, in terms of defensiveness.
So Dewey, I know you have a plane to catch. So it's 8:25, and I'd like to see you make it to the
Thank
airport
you.
on time. And well, why don't you
I've got
tell
a
us?
couple. I'm going to ask a couple more. Yeah,
Okay, and you're going to NAPSI, right? Which is a
I'm
great
going NAPSI.
service on
Thank
behalf
you.
of pollinators. So thank you. So
Thank you.
Pete, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Hopefully it's another quick question. I've heard that whether it's small groups of bees with a queen, maybe it's a secondary or tertiary swarm or something that's relatively small, can actually invade a hive and take over. Is that true? And what's your experience with that?
That is true. We have a name, usurpation. It is true. It occurs in Africanized bees about 20% of the time. It's fairly uncommon, like absconding, fairly uncommon in European bees, either either Italian bees or Cardiola bees, but it does occur. And that is true. A small group lands, worker bees go inside, find the queen, kill her, and then en masse, like a ball of bees, move in, protecting initially their own queen. And then within a very short period of time, then the colony has changed to that new queen's genetic material. So usurpation, very, very unique behavior. The other thing that occurs when swarms move off, we might find a swarm with several queens in it. The swarm that doesn't behave goes in different directions. We can't see the hive. When our abscons move off, as we get towards the end of the wet season, as our abscons gather and move off, they gather together, and we'll have swarms that settle in some sort of a cavity that'll have 15, 20 queens, all that coexist at the same time.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, we will have 2 queen colonies. This time of year, we might find as many as 15, 20% 2 queen colonies. Well, not October, but August, certainly.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah.
So,
So the behaviors are there in our European bees. It's just because of conditions where they are from, built into their genes, they retain these qualities.
how do you kill a hive?
Soapy water. Well, down there, we kill them with
Shake 'em into
gasoline.
soapy water.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah.
kerosene,
Yeah, right.
gasoline. Here, we have nothing legally that we do, of course, but about 3 gallons of soapy water will do the job.
Yeah. I've heard some people just take a CO2 fire extinguisher and just blast it into the hive. And I've tried dry ice, but the bees live through the dry ice. They just
Yeah,
recover
through the
quickly.
dry ice back out at you. Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem with the fire extinguisher, you got to have 3. If one doesn't do it, you better have the second.
Yeah, you got to get a big one. Is what I was
Yeah.
And like Dewey said, the legal way is about 3 gallons of soapy water. I'm just putting that out there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it does.
Yeah.
Do it in the
I've done
evening,
it.
plug
Yeah.
up the bottom. The nice thing with soapy water is you can reuse it, just dry them back out, put them in the sun if you can, and the bees won't mind the soapy water on their brood. And sometimes it doesn't kill the brood, but if you have a full-blown defensive colony, also get rid of the brood.
Right.
Wow. Simon, you have a question? Your hand's up.
Yeah, to what do you attribute the speed of the spread of the Africanized bees? Because a swarm travels a few miles. So in a year or two, you go 6 miles. So if you do the math of it, they were doing 200-300 miles a year.
2 things, repeated swarming, so that if a swarm moves 15 miles and then that colony swarms again and moves 15 miles, you start adding up, you start getting, into the hundreds. The spread through the Amazon, we measured as something close to 300 miles a year. We know they move rather easily to offshore islands. So the Bay of Panama has a huge number of islands, those perlas, and they have moved without island hopping, we believed, 50 miles offshore. One swarm.
That's stunning. I thought a swarm went a few miles, not 15 to 50.
So are these swarming? Is this swarming, or is this a type of absconding? Absconds do go further. And it is not unusual for Scutellata in Africa. They have measured distances 150 to 200 miles. One swarm. They stop and bivouac in between. Find the nearest 7-Eleven and get a hot dog and soda, and then go on.
Any reason why you think Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia show nothing? Is that just a lack of monitoring, as you said, or is it truly that there's a gap there? Because it sure looks like I've been through that area a lot, and it's about as close to Brazil as you get in the United States, it seems like.
No. I know. No, and lots of theories. even when we did our modeling, it did not seem like it would be ideal. And much of that comes from rainfall pattern of the year. So rainfall where they're from in East Africa is, you can, set your calendar by it.
Right.
And areas where they have a lot of rain and frequent rain are areas where they will move quickly, such as through the Amazon basin. And so we think it is not just a lack of sampling, but additionally, it just is not a very favorable habitat for Africanized bee colonization.
The genetic chart that you showed, in the different areas, the 15 bee samples, they look like the genetics almost look like they were all from the same hive. I mean, they're so even. And it just makes me think, is there any evidence that this is getting diluted? It just seems like you would dilute those genetics somewhat. And I know that San Diego has some dilution, but that's a long way to go from Sao Paulo to to San Diego and not have it diluted quite a bit more. So.
Yes, there is evidence of dilution. What they were looking at was specific markers. So if they looked at more markers, then they would start seeing that, yes, there's been introgression of European bees into that population in Panama City, for example.
Mhm.
In my experience in the various countries, the pioneer population is the worst population. They've got to get into an area, get settled, and defensiveness serves them very well. Populations that then are within an area that then become established, then lose some of that defensiveness. If you've got a small population and you send out lots of soldiers and they end up stinging something, that's not a favorable trait for survival if you're losing lots of your workers because they're stinging something that's an enemy. So it's the pioneer populations that are by far the invading populations that have by far been the worst. They then do settle down to a degree. Plus, then programs start catching up. I mean, Panama has had a huge introduction of thousands upon thousands of bees from Hawaii, European bees from Hawaii. And so, yes, there is more of a mixture now.
Wow.
And I can show you some, we can go with just a veil and to bees in Panama. And you think that, well, they're a little more snappy than my bees in my backyard, but I wouldn't call these excessively defensive. And then I can go to a ranch, just outside the city, and they'll run us right off.
Wow. Catherine, you have a quick question?
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick. So I live in Arizona, and right now I take care of about 22 hives. All of them have been requeened, except for one is still aggressive or defensive. My question is, because I live in Arizona, come springtime, we micromanage the best we can, but inevitably we'll lose our inseminated queens and we'll get a defensive hive, many of them. And as summer goes on, it's really hot here and it's almost impossible to get a new queen mailed in. They just melt at the airport. They never survive. It's just impossible. So by midsummer now, 50% of our hives are defensive. My question is, what we do try to do to survive is we often try to, we call it a first generation. And so we try to get brood in there. And then of course, to make a queen, they'll go out and mate. But you were saying that the aggressiveness can come from the drones. So are we wasting our time trying to get rid of, or trying to keep these first generation queens?
No, because you still have the makeup from the mother, and it's the number of drones that she will then mate with that will then determine how the number of drones that are Africanized, how hot or defensive that colony will be. No, we've got to work with that first generation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another quick question. Am I messing with genetics by trying to get this mix in there, you know, of the Italian queen, and then letting her go out and see the drones from the Africanized drones? Is that mixing with genetics, or is that going to be all right?
What you really do to need for your management is circle back at the end of the year and get the more gentle bee queens into them. So then you're starting the year with that mixture, you know, starting next year after the short break in, you know, December and January. You're starting the year with gentle material. And then as counties get too defensive, so, you know, that first generation, keep trying to break them down. Don't let the counties get as large, and keep trying to break them down.
Okay, that's what we do. We vacuum out a lot of bees.
Indeed. Oh, indeed. The other thing that you might try to do for those counties that are not as defensive is keep taking brood away from them and keep putting that brood into the other counties. So you're banking on those queens and counties that are still kind of gentle as being your brood busters. You're busting them as for brood all the time to put into those other colonies.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really rich questions this evening, everyone. I've learned as much in the questions as I have through the presentation. Thank you so much, Dewey. And it sounds like we're going to need to have you back, because I know that I have a few more questions, and I'm sure other folks here do as well.
Thank you.
I
Thank
know
you.
that you said you could talk for hours on how they maintain their own genetic ID and change the ID of the European bees. I'd love to learn more about that. And I'm also wondering if we're on the right track calling them overly defensive bees rather than Africanized bees, as we're trying to get away. Should we be moving away from calling them Africanized bees, especially when we look at your charts? You know, they're quite hybridized in California, especially. We're looking for guidance on that too.
I think it's useful to call them that because I think we're at a crossroads where I think what could really occur, and maybe the Master B Corp program is maybe one to lead the charge, is that we need to try to have a better effort to not admix the bees that we have in the southern part of the state as much into the northern part of the state.
Okay. Yeah.
I think we can bank on the studies that we've seen that we can keep them out of most of the breeding population. I mean, Sacramento Bay Area is where there are some queen breeders, certainly, into Yolo and
Orland, yeah,
Orland
Northern Cal,
County.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We certainly, and they need to be protected from those genetics. Indeed,
Yes. Yeah.
they
Yeah.
help keep the
Yeah.
balance. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So thank you, and thank
Okay.
you for your service on behalf of the California Master Beekeeper Program. We wish you safe journeys to
Thank you.
NAPC, and we look forward to having you back again soon. Thank you for
Be
your
my
time
pleasure.
this evening. Take care.
Take care, all. Thank you. Great question.